The final item of business today is a members' business debate on motion number 4794 in the name of Malcolm Chisholm on 20 years of zero tolerance campaigns. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put, and I would invite members who wish to speak in the debate to press the request to speak buttons now or as soon as possible, please. Mr Chisholm, if you're ready, 7 minutes, please, to open the debate.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. It's a great privilege for me today to pay tribute to the enormous contribution of zero tolerance to the primary prevention of violence against women since the groundbreaking Billboard campaign was launched in this city almost exactly 20 years ago. Zero tolerance has always challenged male attitudes in relation to domestic abuse, rape and sexual abuse, and now it is extending that challenge to encompass what some regard as more acceptable forms of violence against women, such as pornography, prostitution and commercial sexual exploitation more generally. But first, to what seemed like a revolutionary moment in the winter of 1992-93, when I vividly recall graphic messages about the prevalence and causes of violence against women appearing all along Princes Street and in other locations such as Easter Road Football Stadium. Male abuse of power is a crime. No man has the right. From 3 to 93 women are raped. End the male protection racket. She lives with a successful businessman, loving father and respected member of the community. Last week, he hospitalised her. The campaign shone a light on what had been in the dark for a very long time. It told us not just of the shocking prevalence of violence against women, but of the way that it affected all sections of society, contrary to some stereotypes of that time. Crucially, it related all this to gender inequality in society and saw violence against women as a profound societal and cultural problem rooted in unequal power relations between women and men. That, as far as I know, was also the first campaign to target and challenge men. I reread before this debate a speech I gave about zero tolerance in the House of Commons 20 years ago, and I referred there to a current, at that time, Scottish Office campaign in 1993, which was targeting women and telling them how to act so as to avoid suffering violence. So it was really groundbreaking in many different ways, the zero tolerance campaign, and I pay tribute in particular to Evelyn Gillan and Frankie Raffles, who so tragically died in 1994, because they were the two women who were the drivers of this campaign, although they incorporated the support of Margaret McGregor as chair of the Council's Women's Committee at that time, and that was very important as well. Finally, I should pay tribute to the Evening News, because they, particularly through the journalists Nicola Barry and Jean West, covered it in a very sustained, sympathetic and comprehensive way, and that had a big effect on me as well as the Billboard campaign. That campaign led to similar campaigns all over the country and indeed the world, but Zero Tolerance here in Edinburgh moved on to develop many more primary prevention materials and to engage in many more violence against women campaigns. I have no time to describe all of these at present, but I would note in particular the emphasis they are now putting and have been putting for some time on early intervention. And I think in that regard the Respect materials that they developed for schools some time ago are particularly important, although they are also now beginning to start planning action at the preschool period. I'm glad to hear that Respect will be relaunched in a few weeks' time, and I hope that that will be taken up more widely by schools than perhaps it has been hitherto. One final campaign I would just mention, because I attended the launch a year or so ago, was a campaign called PACT, capital P-A-C-T for the official report, which involves a package of materials to engage with violence against women in the workplace. So many campaigns, many materials still being produced by Zero Tolerance. But I want to move on swiftly to the present, because now Zero Tolerance, in a sense, has become more challenging than ever. We all know, I hope, that violence against women is a continuum of various forms of violence, but unfortunately some forms are more socially acceptable, such as, for some people, pornography, prostitution, lap dancing or other forms of commercial sexual exploitation. Now, starting with pornography, that is very clearly about the abuse and exploitation of women and a central part of violence against women culture. I recently attended a lecture by Professor Miranda Horvat from London, who's a well-known expert in this area, and she was talking about rape-prone societies, and she gave the audience at that meeting a little test. She gave us a series of quotations by men convicted of rape, and she gave us a series of quotations from lads' mags, and we had to say which was which. I found that very difficult, but the professor sitting next to me said that she found it totally impossible, and she is perhaps the #1 academic expert on rape in Scotland. So I'm very pleased that Zero Tolerance has a porcupine project involving young 16 to 19-year-olds, men as well as women, who target the porn industry, and they've done that by a Facebook campaign and in other ways. Now, prostitution and lap dancing, fortunately, will be discussed in this Parliament during the course of this year, and I pay tribute to Rhoda Grant and Sandra White for raising those issues. But they clearly also are forms of abuse and exploitation. We should remember, for example, that 9 out of 10 women in prostitution want to exit, and that many, if not most of those, have suffered abuse in the past. So, as well as remembering that prostitution is on the violence against women at spectrum, I hope in the course of this year we will look very carefully at the evidence, particularly from Sweden, where the purchase of sex by men was criminalised in 1999, and in Norway, where it was criminalised more recently in 2009. I hope members will look at the difference that that has made, because I think the more we look at the evidence and realise the nature of prostitution, the more we will become supportive of Rhoda Grant's proposals. Now, today's debate is about primary prevention, but I'm sure Zero Tolerance won't object if I highlight in the final minute a crisis of funding that is facing the Edinburgh Women's Rape and Sexual Abuse Centre. Currently, that centre is facing a minimum 50% loss to its annual income due to the end of key funding streams, not government funding streams, I hasten to add. The centre is one of the busiest rape crisis services in Scotland. The need for its service is significant. It has a 9-month waiting list, and demand, unfortunately, tragically, keeps increasing each year. Last year, it cost the centre £330,000 to deliver this level of support, most of which funds frontline staffing posts. At the current time, they have £100,000 secure funding beyond May of this year. So if they are unable to raise sufficient funds, they face losing 75% of their specialist counsellors and support staff, and they're extremely concerned that if that happens, it will leave women in Edinburgh and the Lothians who have experienced sexual violence and abuse without the level of support they need and deserve. And I think, of course, some of the figures I have given there highlight that we have a continuing problem. Of course, Zero Tolerance would be the first to admit that, notwithstanding all the work that has gone into primary prevention, the problem is not going away. We've heard a lot about rape in India, and that is absolutely appalling, but we should focus on rape in Scotland, and we have a serious problem. So let's support, of course, the organisations such as Rape Crisis Centres and Women's Aid that provides the services, but also continue to invest in the primary prevention work of Zero Tolerance and others, because clearly it is needed more than ever.
Many, many thanks. I now call on Gil Patterson to be followed by Anne McTaggart. 4 minutes, please.
Thanks very much, Presiding Officer. Can I thank Malcolm Chisholm for bringing this debate to the Parliament tonight, and particularly pay homage to the words and sentiments that he used. Very grateful for that. I would like to declare an interest, as I am a board member of Rape Crisis Central Scotland. In December, I spoke in a members' debate led by my colleague Jamie Hepburn on the White Ribbon campaign, which aimed to involve men in tackling the scourge of men's violence against women and children. That campaign was started a short while ago, and it is supported by a number of organisations such as Women's Aid, Rape Crisis Scotland and Amnesty International. Zero Tolerance is also an organisation that is significantly involved in the campaign, and I believe that if it was not for the groundbreaking work of Zero Tolerance over 20 years ago, campaigns such as the White Ribbon one would not have been even thought of, never mind in full operation. It's only right that we praise these organisations and bring attention to the important work that they carry out to prevent violence towards women. I've been involved with this serious issue for a good number of years, and I've seen it firsthand, the vital work that has been carried out. From raising awareness of the issue across society as a whole in order to prevent the violence, to dealing with the aftermath of that violence and comforting the victims, these organisations should be commended. Prior to the start of the Zero Tolerance campaigns in 1992, there seemed an almost reluctant acceptance towards violence against women. Few men in Scotland were involved in any of the campaigns to prevent the violence, and it was left to a small number of committed women to fight for a woman's right to be protected from abusive men. Since then, there has been a marked change in society towards this crime, although we have still not eradicated it from as the motion rightly points out tonight. Although I am not of the opinion that the incidents of violence against women and children are not on the increase, but I do believe the hard work carried out by organisations like Zero Tolerance has given many women the confidence to act and come forward to report attack, bringing this into the public domain and indeed the public's attention. This has been achieved by the provision of secure advice along with meaningful support, which has been a hallmark of Zero Tolerance since its inception. I believe it sends out a strong message that this debate has led by a man, Malcolm Chisholm, which I am pleased to speak in, and I praise the number of male colleagues who have contributed in these type of debates over the years. There is, however, still a lot of work to be done to bring about a zero-tolerance culture in this country. As a man, I have a moral obligation to do that, and I can try and raise awareness amongst male-dominated forums and institutions. Although the Scottish Government and its predecessors have taken a number of steps to tackle this scourge, it should not be left to the Government or Zero Tolerance alone. We all have a responsibility not only as parliamentarians, but also as human beings to tackle this problem. Organisations such as Zero Tolerance have an important role to play in this, and I fully support their actions and their future campaigns. I make a commitment to. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I now call on Anne McTaggart to be followed by Anna Mulgoldie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Violence against women is too often a hidden problem in Scottish society, and the work of campaigns to promote zero tolerance to domestic, sexual and physical abuse is invaluable in the wider effort to tackle sexism and promote a fairer and safer society. I thank Malcolm Chisholm for securing this time in the Chamber to celebrate the progress that has been made as a result of 20 years of zero tolerance campaigning, and also for the opportunity to highlight the needless suffering of women across Scotland who continue to face intimidation, violence and isolation on a daily basis. In Glasgow's Drumchapel area, the first Women's Aid Centre based within a residential scheme was established to assist women and families suffering from domestic abuse. This is the only service in Scotland that operates 24/7 and is currently providing crucial support to over 40 families every year. This resource, with the support of volunteers and community activists, provides women and children with a safe place in which to secure long-term accommodation, receive medical treatment and build better lives away from abusive partners and destructive relationships. Every woman in Scotland should have access to the standard of services and the quality of resources that are provided by Women's Aid in Drumchapel. And after 20 years of zero tolerance campaigning, it is not acceptable for abuse victims to be subject to a postcode lottery of crisis services dependent only on the resourcing of domestic abuse services in their area. The work of Domestic Abuse Court in Glasgow has also improved the circumstances of many women in the process of exciting abuse relationships by speeding up the process of justice for the perpetrators of abuse. This specialised process results in a conviction rate of around 85%, compared with only 50% of cases dealt with through the ordinary procedure of the Sheriff Court. This is due in part to the work of Assist, an organisation working with abused women across Scotland to ensure they are informed and supported through the criminal justice process. This service is operated by Glasgow City Council and is independent from the criminal process, but works with victims before, during and after the criminal trial. Sadly, many of the organisations and projects that support the work of women's aid centres across Scotland are already at threat of closure and cannot rely on consistency of funding from local government following severe budget cuts. Glasgow City Council alone will absorb a £153 million reduction in their budget over the next 2 years, meaning that community organisations established to support victims of domestic abuse and sexual assault are at risk of cuts to resources, resulting in poorer services for the victims that they'll work with. It is only through the proper resourcing and unqualified support of these grassroots advocacy organisations that we can make the zero tolerance campaigns truly effective and show that Scotland does not and will not tolerate physical, sexual or psychological abuse against women. Thank you.
Thank you. Now call on Annabel Goldie to be followed by Sarah Boyack.
Deputy Presiding Officer, can I also thank Malcolm Chisholm for bringing such an important issue to the Chamber for debate. When the first ever zero tolerance campaigns were launched in Edinburgh in November 1992, that was a watershed moment, as so eloquently described by Malcolm Chisholm. And yet, 20 years on from those pioneering campaigns, regrettably, violence against women is still with us. It remains high on the political agenda. It is a pervasive social problem that affects every neighbourhood throughout Scotland. It can be found in every social background. And against this bleak backdrop, Zero Tolerance is a torchbearer working to tackle the causes of men's violence against women, working with individuals, communities, women's organisations, schools, the media and others to address the causes of violence against women and bring about change. So, starting the new year with this debate, just over a month after Jamie Hepburn's members' debate on the White Ribbon campaign, is a good way to send out a positive message of support from this Parliament to drive forward that change. We need to reassure victims that this behaviour is not normal. It is repugnant, disgusting and unacceptable. And victims must be supported in understanding that they are not to blame. And we need to send an uncompromising message to the perpetrators of this abuse, the cowardly bullies who frighten, threaten and hurt, that they will be exposed, their names will become public and their squalid little secret will be out. I said in the December debate that violence against women is unacceptable and abhorrent and has no place in Scotland. And I referred to the statistics, which are very depressing. In Scotland, nearly 60,000 incidents of domestic abuse were recorded by the police in 2011 and 12. That's a 7% increase in the preceding year. And since 2002-2003, there's been a 67% increase in recorded incidents of domestic abuse, and currently 163 incidents of domestic abuse are recorded by the police each day. Deputy Presiding Officer, the greatest protection available to the perpetrators of this misery is silence. And that silence is malign. And that's why domestic abuse must be reported, and when it's reported, it must be tackled. And it's vital that help is made available for women who are fleeing violence. And we should recognise, as others have said, the valuable work of many voluntary groups in that regard. I've recently visited organisations in my own area that do excellent work to support and protect women and their children who are suffering from domestic abuse. My most recent visits were to Renfrewshire Women's Aid and Inverclyde Women's Aid, who do fantastic work to support women and their families. Presiding Officer, we must never forget that children can also be victims. They may be present when incidents of abuse occur. They may be the subject of violence directly to themselves. And I was heartened to hear that on the Zero Tolerance Scotland website there is a link to a website for younger people. I think Malcolm Chisholm referred to that, Safe Hub Scotland, which provides information and guidance to younger people who've experienced domestic abuse. Now, I was interested to learn it was designed by young people who have experienced such abuse, and it is for young people, and I think that's an invaluable tool. In this age of technology and social media, I think there is a huge opportunity to inform, to reassure, to share information, to give guidance and advice to victims. Now, and certainly.
Hamzala Malik.
Thank you very much for that intervention. I wondered whether you would agree with me if we can insist on the media, particularly television and film industry, that the perpetrators of showing violence against women should actually be outlawed in Scotland, and perhaps the government could take measures to do that, because that also encourages people to justify the violence against women.
Thank you. Annabel Goldie.
I think the member makes a valid point, and I think any measures which can be taken to discourage the portrayal of this as something that's routine, or, I think this chamber would condemn it, obviously, but in the minds of some acceptable. Anything that began to discourage that and deter that would be worthwhile. Presiding Officer, I was simply going to say to the Minister, I know his colleague Mike Russell has today become the first MSP with an app which can be downloaded. But I simply wonder, couldn't the Scottish Government consider an app specifically for children who are living in a situation of abuse? Because I think it could provide help and information, it could be accessed discreetly, and I think it would be an enormous support. In conclusion, Deputy Presiding Officer, can I pay tribute to the excellent organisations like Zero Tolerance and Scottish Women's Aid? I think we're clear about the united will in this Parliament to keep violence against women at the forefront of our agenda, to keep talking about it and to keep providing encouragement and support. So I congratulate these organisations who work so tirelessly to support those so desperately in need of their help.
Thank you very much. I now call on Sarah Byatt to be followed by Christina McKelvey. 4 minutes, please.
I want to add my congratulations to Malcolm Chisholm for securing this debate tonight, because I think it's important that we celebrate the 20 years of work carried out by Zero Tolerance. And there have been achievements. Malcolm's motion is right. The early days of campaigning were pioneering. Violence against women simply wasn't seen as a political issue, and it had to be forced onto the agenda. And women activists such as Margaret McGregor, who chaired the Edinburgh Council Women's Committee, campaigned to put violence against women on the agenda and crucially supported investment for organisations such as Rape Crisis so that women could be supported. And women's committees across the country were vital in making sure that our councils acted. And the work done by Zero Tolerance to promote awareness, to provide research, to provide campaigning literature, particularly the hard-hitting campaigns that Malcolm Chisholm quoted tonight, were hugely important in challenging outdated sexist attitudes. And women have campaigned for the last 20 years to change those outdated sexist views, whether it's on rape, domestic abuse or sexual violence. But those issues still need to be put to the fore. And tonight's debate is for them to celebrate all their hard work, but also to put our sympathy with the women who've experienced abuse or intimidation that most of us cannot even begin to imagine how their lives have been scarred. We also should debate the progress that has been made in terms of legislation that we have passed in this Parliament, with the first Committee Act of this Parliament, promoted and driven by our former colleague Maureen McMillan, who promoted the Protection from Abuse Bill, which gave protection to victims of domestic violence who were in unmarried relationships. Then, to more recent times, the Forced Marriage Act in 2001. And I think it's important to say that women's voices in our political institutions, whether it's our parliaments or whether it's our councils, are actually heard, and those voices are given legitimacy. Because as the Zero Tolerance briefing makes clear, there are still far too many women in Scotland who are experiencing violence in their lives today. There are still high levels of violence against women. Reported rapes rose by 19% in the year 2011-12, and as Annabel Goldie mentioned, domestic abuse reported to the police rose by 7% in 2011-12. Those figures are absolutely unacceptable, so we need to add our voices to opposing that violence. The bills proposed, I think, by Rhoda Grant and Sandra White pose some really hard questions for this Parliament about the purchase of sex and the impact on women of attitudes towards women promoted by lap dancing. And we need to seize on those debates to make sure that we promote a wide debate across Scotland, to make sure that we modernise attitudes and to do everything we can, whether it's in legislation or policy, to transform the inequality that women in Scotland still experience today, because the evidence is there. We still live in an unequal society. Now, the campaign also needs the support of men. In this chamber, whether it's from Gill or Malcolm, or beside me, the work that Graham Pearson did when he was a senior police officer to make sure that the police played their support. We need the support of men as well. It needs all of us to tackle domestic violence, to tackle sexual violence, and to tackle the intimidation that women experience today. And our challenge is to make sure that we tackle inequality and to tackle the outdated sexist attitudes that objectify and tolerate violence against women, however it comes at them. I hope in summing up today the Minister will focus on what the Scottish Government is committed to do to make sure that in times of austerity, violence against women doesn't get put on the back burner, because you will have our support across the chamber. Anne McTaggart was right to highlight the issue of local authorities facing a huge financial pressure. That must not lead to the downgrading of support for the preventative work done by groups like Zero Tolerance, the community campaigns that were referred to by Anne McTaggart, and to the vital work of our rape crisis centres. That vital work needs to continue, and it needs our support. And I hope Malcolm Chisholm's debate tonight will focus that action and focus that support going forward. Thank you.
Many thanks. Now calling Christina McKelvey to be followed by Graham Pearson. 4 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I add my congratulations to Malcolm Chisholm for bringing this debate to the Chamber today, and commend him for the long and unstinting and committed support that he has given to this issue. Just quoting from his speech that he gave a while ago in Westminster just shows you the length of time that he has been involved in this. And it's at this point I should declare an interest in that I am the co-convener of the cross-party group in men's violence against women, and have the great honour of being the co-convener along with Malcolm, and I'm sure in the last year I've learned a lot from him. Presiding Officer, we all know and understand that violence against women is still a significant problem, and we've heard many stories of that today. I think one of the things that we should commend ourselves on, which we don't do that often, is the cross-party support on this issue. It's a credit to this Parliament, but it's also a credit to everyone in Scottish top politics over the year who has supported and taken this issue forward. But we also know that work needs to be done, continue to be done. We need to continue to tackle the problem in all its forms, and we've heard a number of those forms today. One of the other issues that I am quite interested in is the issue about human trafficking, and that's something that another cross-party group in this Parliament is pushing as well. But it's something, again, that we should take very seriously. And we should also remember our worldwide issue that comes up with how we focus what we do in Scotland, and how then we can lead the way in the rest of the world. And although we should not maybe focus too much worldwide, we should be focusing on the problem in Scotland. We should not forget that if we can change attitudes in Scotland, then we can maybe change attitudes worldwide, and we would not be seeing some of the horrific scenes we're seeing from India right now. Now, the original Zero Tolerance campaign, as Malcolm Chisholm said, was a 6-month campaign with billboards. It then went into a poster campaign for workplaces. And at the time, I was a young Unison steward who was tasked as part of the Women's Committee to put these posters up in my workplace, to be faced with the attitude of people who wanted to tear those posters down, because they were too hard-hitting with some of the words. They were too nasty, they were too scary for some people. But let me just refresh your memory about what these posters were. The first poster dealt with child sexual abuse. And one of the posters says, but by the age of 18, one of them will have been subjected to sexual abuse. It's a very, very hard image to see. It's a very hard image to understand, but it was something that we really needed to put across. So I put that poster up, and it was torn down, so I put it back up. The second poster dealt with rape, and it was a very, very close poster. It was the crux of the poster was a black and white poster that says, from 3 to 93, all women, these women could be raped. It was very, very hard. But another poster, again, that some of my colleagues said was too scary, therefore we should take it down. So therefore, when they went away, I put it back up. So you get a theme here of how I dealt with this as a young Unison steward. The strapline at that time is husband, father or stranger, male abuse of power is a crime. And it is a crime, and it's always been a crime, and we should ensure that it continues to get that focus, and it continues to be absolutely rejected by society as a whole. The third poster dealt with domestic violence, and again, that challenged the accepted myth that domestic violence only occurs in working-class households. We definitely dealt with that. The sharp line for that one was she lives with a successful businessman, loving father and respected member of the community. Last week he hospitalised her. A very concerning one. Presiding Officer, I'm a wee bit worried about my time because the clock didn't change.
Your time is really up. Thank you.
Okay, just to finish, a very powerful message, very powerful images. We were delighted to host an event here on the 6th of December where all parties spoke at that. I think we need to continue to change those attitudes. I think we should commend the work of Jenny Kemp, of Frankie and Evelyn, and we should commend the Scottish Government because one of the new pieces of the Children's Hearings Act is the automatic referral to a children's panel of a child who has been subject in a household of domestic violence. I think we should impress on the Government to continue that work and can I congratulate Zero Tolerance and everyone that's been involved in this debate.
Many thanks. Now calling Graham Pearson to be followed by Sandra White. 4 minutes, please.
Presiding Officer, thanks very much for allowing me to contribute to this debate. I commend Malcolm Chisholm in bringing these matters to the Chamber tonight and would support his call regarding the continuing abuse of women using new technology and new means, whether it be through the sex trade and the likes. I also thank Sarah Boyack for acknowledging the work that's been done in the past, particularly by the police service in Scotland in the intervening decades. But nevertheless, over 1,000 women are victims of domestic abuse, even as we speak. Probably somewhere in Scotland, as we debate this matter, a woman is being abused in her home, the place where she should feel safe and where she should feel she can be as she should be. My own commitment in these matters date back nearly 40 years. My first attendance at a murder inquiry as a detective officer was to go to a dwelling house in the north side of Glasgow, believing that I would be involved in an interesting investigation to discover who some miscreant was, only to find the week before Christmas that I was going into a tenement building where a woman had been kicked to death all round the house. Not a single room in that house was absent of her blood, her hair and other tissue. Her crime, as far as her partner was concerned, was that she had taken the benefit cheque and had spent it on food and Christmas presents for children. Her partner had been out at the bookies during the day, had imbibed at tea time, had come home and felt aggrieved at the fact that the woman in his life had taken the decision to spend his cash in that manner. The abuse of women has got nothing to do with sex. It's entirely about power, it's about control, and it's about gratification and abuse in its real sense. That murder has never left me. For months and years thereafter, I've attended many events of sexual abuse, rape and murder, where women have been abused by the people they should have trusted most, the men in their life, and were repeatedly let down by these men. Hence my own commitment to zero tolerance, hence my own commitment to changing attitudes in Scottish society to try and ensure that these things no longer occur. There have been many successes, and there's no doubt that zero tolerance have played a major part in those changes. But nevertheless, the relationships between men and women need to change for the future, and women need to find a way of playing their full part in our society and receiving due respect for what they are, human beings. We need to take forward this campaign. It cannot be put on the shelf as something work complete and done. We can feel good about what we've done in the past. There is much more to be done in the future. There are new strains and strains in terms of abuse. And we have young people who are using mobile phones and the internet to debase girls and women and utilise that to undermine them. And I would hope that the Minister would bear in mind these new developments and take advice on how we might deal with these matters. The important thing for this Chamber is not to take its eye off the ball. Domestic abuse is still a major problem in Scotland. 59,847 cases in the last year. Children are being abused in these circumstances. Children are learned to abuse in the future. We need to put an end to that. Thanks very much, Presiding Officer.
And thank you. And before I call Sandra White to be followed by Alison Johnson, I would wish to inform the Chamber that due to the numbers of members wishing to speak in the debate, I am minded to accept a motion under Rule 8.14.3 that the debate be extended by up to 30 minutes. Mr Chisholm. Thank you very much. We will now extend the debate, and the question is that the debate be extended. Are we all agreed? Thank you. I now call on Sandra White.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and I'm very grateful that the debate being extended and I and others can have our contribution heard. I would like to thank Malcolm Chisholm and congratulate him also for securing this debate. I also congratulate Zero Tolerance and the many other groups who have worked tirelessly to raise awareness of the truly horrific crime of domestic and sexual abuse. I think the contributions have been excellent and have been very, very harrowing in some of the issues that have actually been raised. And I do take on board what others have said. It's not just the victims of domestic abuse of women, it's the children who witness this as well. And I think Annabel Goldie picked up on that also. And I would hope that the Criminal Justice Bill, with the emphasis on corroboration, will move somewhere towards, in a positive way, towards convictions of these horrific crimes. I want to concentrate in the time that I've got on one particular part of the motion, and Malcolm Chisholm has touched on it also when he mentions lap dancing clubs, adult entertainment, basically the commercial side, as they might call it, of sexualisation. It's something which I and others have worked on for many, many years, and I'm grateful for other members mentioning the fact about the bill which I had tried to put through earlier. I think many of the members who are here today or tonight will remember that before the elections in 2011, I did try to put forward legislation which would have the legislation which would enable councils to say that any sexual exploitation such as lap dancing clubs, pole dancing and adult entertainment venues, strip clubs of that kind, the council could say that even none was too much, and they would have the powers in that council to say, no, we do not want these clubs in our areas. And I thought it was a perfectly good part of legislation, but unfortunately, as members will recollect, when the legislation was put forward, even with the government support, unfortunately the opposition voted it down, and I'm very sorry about that, but I do take heart from the contributions here tonight. It's are very positive, that say that the bill that I'm proposing and also the other bill that's been proposed by Rhoda Grant, we should look at it, debate it, and hopefully it will have cross-party support. So I would look forward to the debate on these individual bills, because I was looking through the internet today and other days as well, and people had sent me in various pieces of newsworthy quotes, I would say. And in the city of Aberdeen, if they had actually got application for a strip club, Aberdeen would have had 8 strip clubs. Fortunately, it was thrown out. It would have had 8 strip clubs. It would have the largest number of these clubs in Scotland. And next to that, only London, central London, would have had the same amount of strip clubs. And then I'm reminded about the South Ayrshire application, which wasn't going to be applied for a pole dancing club, but took heart from a change in council, and also the fact that Glasgow City Council was disallowed from saying no, they couldn't have these types of clubs in Glasgow, put forward their application, and they won that application. Now we're looking at maybe 4 or 5 clubs in the South Ayrshire area, somewhere which is not within a city. So I think it's very, it's incumbent on us to basically say that legislation comes from this place and should be handed down to councils, and they should have the right to say whether the local people there want this type of club or not. As has been mentioned before by Malcolm and others, it's not just the thoughts of sexual abuse, sexual violence. It starts somewhere, and where do they see it? Graham Pearson has mentioned the internet, Hansel Malik mentioned the television. And when you look at these types of incidents where women are looked upon as objects and not human beings, this is where it starts from, and it's education also. So I think we should really look at that, and I'm very grateful for being allowed to speak in this debate, and I do hope that people will support the legislation that comes through. Thank you very much.
Many thanks. I now call on Alison Johnson to be followed by Claudia Beamish.
Thank you. Kofi Annan, the former UN Secretary-General, said, Violence against women is perhaps the most shameful human rights violation, and it is perhaps the most pervasive. As long as it continues, we cannot claim to be making real progress towards equality. Last autumn, there was global condemnation and revulsion at the attempted murder of Malala Yousafzai, an incredible 15-year-old girl targeted for campaigning for education, a basic human right for girls in Afghanistan. And more recently, we learned of the brutal rape and death of a young Indian woman, a medical student, attacked by 6 men while simply travelling on a bus. These extreme examples of violence against women and children have drawn global attention to this issue and strengthened the demand for change. When I first became involved in politics, I listened with interest to those discussing whether or not there was a need to take action for gender balance in politics and beyond. And after 13 years in politics and more than 30 in sport, I'm convinced that action is needed. At local government level, it's less likely that travel away from home will be regularly required. So you might think that would make involvement in local politics more accessible and more appealing to women with young children or other caring responsibilities, but only 1 in 5 councillors is a woman. And that's a great shame, because councils make a lot of decisions that impact on women's daily lives. And when I was on Edinburgh Council, as I've said before, 2 highly regarded nurseries were closed, and all those I met campaigning against closure were women. Not surprisingly, because they're still much more likely to be involved with nursery and so on a day-to-day basis, but they're much less likely to be involved in the decision-making process. When leisure budgets were tight, one of the first things to be cut was creche provision. Women campaigned hard, but they weren't listened to. Subsequently, access to leisure and fitness was made more challenging. So why are there so few women in representative politics? Does the occasional hostile manner of debate put women off? In my first ever formal meeting of full council, a colleague in another party was described as a fishwife. Now, I was astonished, but not an eye was batted by more experienced councillors. It was clearly not a big deal. It was the cultural norm. Or is it the fact that council meetings take place in the evenings, at a time when women might be dealing with food and family, perhaps bath and bedtime? And while representation is better here in our national parliament, at about a third, it's simply not good enough. Conversely, male primary school teachers are a rarity, though male head teachers are not. But why does any of this matter? It matters because violence against women happens in a context. A zero-tolerance state, violence against women is more than domestic abuse. During the Olympic Games, we rejoiced when women succeeded, but that coverage was short-term. I recently tweeted my excitement at finding a woman on the sports pages of a national newspaper. But that excitement was short-lived because she was only pictured because she was someone's girlfriend. The long-running quiz Question of Sport may be chaired by Sue Barker, but in common with panel shows from QI, Have I Got News for You, and many news discussion programmes that I'm sure we all watch, women are consistently underrepresented. Indeed, the Leveson inquiry raised concerns about the way women are portrayed in the media. And why are women so often portrayed in swimwear? And frequently with a critical headline about their dismal failure to banish cellulite. Seriously, that is not what concerns the women I know, and it leads to the objectification of women. And this is what we must challenge. We must challenge the objectification of women, the obsession with how we look. We need strong messages about what women do, of what women have achieved, of women succeeding in the professions, in sport, art and teaching. Such women should be highly visible. All forms of violence against women happen in a cultural context. And as we debate the future of Scotland, Presiding Officer, we must include debate about the prevalence of abuse and persistent and deep-rooted gender inequalities. Because if we can change the culture, and we must, violence against women is preventable. I'd like to thank Malcolm Chisholm for bringing this important debate, and I'd like to thank Zero Tolerance for their groundbreaking and ongoing work. Thank you.
Very good speech. I now call on Claudia Beamish, after which we'll move to a closing speech from the Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I want to start, like other members, by congratulating Malcolm Chisholm on bringing this members' debate, and also to thank him and Christina McKelvey as conveners of the cross-party group on men's violence against women. As a new deputy convener, I hope I can make a contribution in the future. And it's something that I take extremely seriously, like members across the chamber Today, I want to take a sideways look at the issue, having just returned from a trip in Thailand. As I was driven through rubber plantations to meet my new in-laws, I recalled a tale told by my grandmother of her niece Jessie from Aberdeen, who had married a rubber planter and returned to his plantation with him to find her life intolerable. She left him and returned to Scotland to be told by her relatives there, or here rather, that she should have stayed and made the best of it. How far we have come from those attitudes today in Scotland. I decided to light a candle in Jessie's memory in the Lanaram Buddhist temple that we visited on New Year's Day with my new son-in-law, and did so also to try to shine a light on all relationships which are wrongly based on men's abuse of power over women the world over. The film made by Lindsay Mann, commissioned by Zero Tolerance to mark 20 years since the first Z campaign in Edinburgh, looks at the current focus for Zero Tolerance in their work to effect positive social change here in Scotland. In the film, Evelyn Gillan, a previous director of Zero Tolerance, says, and I quote, "The value of any legacy is the extent to which people pick up the baton and carry on with it. It is important that Zero Tolerance, as other members have highlighted, is now working in new ways. But with my sideways look across the world, I ask myself how much we're able to share the Zero Tolerance campaign across the globe in these times of connectivity. On a recent fact-finding visit to Gaza, John Finney and myself heard from a community mental health programme of the high incidence of domestic violence in families where men turn their anger and frustration at their powerlessness in society onto their families. The need for support for women and children is essential here, and yet resources are few. With the support of the Council for European-Palestinian Relations, we intend to arrange a visit of young women from Gaza. We hope to arrange for them to meet with young people from the Zero Tolerance campaign so that links can be made. There is a clear opportunity to support women elsewhere, and we should always look for chances to pick up that baton. I also believe we should have the confidence to speak out about the broader oppression of women by men across the world. We should not be afraid, due to cultural relativism, to say women have the right to fulfil themselves outside the home through education and in the world of work if they so choose. The stifling of opportunity for women is also an abuse by males, in my view. And Alison Johnson highlighted the issues of Malala Yousafzai, the 15-year-old girl shot in the head after campaigning for women's education, to which there has been a positive outcome in her recovery. But with a tragic ending was the recent gang rape, also highlighted by Alison Johnson, of the young paramedic who was left on a road for dead. After 13 days in hospital, where she gave accounts of the attack, she did indeed die. This has been called by one Indian professional the clash of centuries. After many years of government promotion of girls' education and young women thus entering the world of work, many men, raised with a sense of entitlement simply for being male, still believe women should be restricted to roles as wives and mothers. But tens of thousands in India have recently carried the baton on the streets, and the Indian government has now acknowledged that violence against women is a national challenge. I ask us all not only to work in Scotland, but to find ways that we can work to support women who are equal in their rights across the world today and from now on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call on the Cabinet Secretary, Alec Neil, to wind up the debate on behalf of the Government.
Thank you very much indeed, Presiding Officer. This has been a very good debate indeed, and like everybody else, I want to pay tribute to Malcolm Chisholm, both for securing this debate and also for his lifelong commitment to this particular mission, and indeed many others in the Chamber who have spoken tonight from all sides of the Chamber have also been very committed to this subject and spoken on numerous occasions in the Parliament. I also want to take the opportunity, obviously, to say something about Zero Tolerance and congratulate that organisation on its anniversary as well. And obviously already a number of people have recalled the days when Zero Tolerance was formed. And as Malcolm said, many of the founding members and the people who did so much work 20 years ago to get that organisation up and running, and indeed to begin to change attitudes, which is actually more important than the organisation itself. Many of those people are no longer with us, but they should be remembered for their contribution, and in particular Frankie Raffles, who, as Malcolm Chisholm said, died in 1994. I was also pleased that Scotland leads the rest of the UK and indeed further afield in many aspects of the campaign on zero tolerance and related issues. And in my first ministerial appointment a few years ago, I was happy to introduce the legislation in outlawing forced marriage in Scotland and the implications that that had. I wanted specifically to mention a couple of things that were mentioned, first of all, by Graham Pearson and by Annabel Goldie, because both basically referred to the use of technology. One in the case of Graham Pearson about how technology is being used to abuse young girls and young women, and indeed older women as well, and also Annabel Goldie in terms of particularly the possibility of developing an app for children who are under threat of domestic violence or living in a situation where there is domestic violence or domestic abuse. I can say, as chair of the Scottish Government's group on domestic abuse and violence, that we are already looking at whether we can develop an app, along with the police and others, for women who are under threat, so that very quickly they can get the kind of assistance that they require. But also I will take up the suggestion from Annabel Goldie about developing an app specifically for children as well. And I think the use of that kind of technology could be very helpful in particular situations, hopefully in prevention, as well as being able to ensure that the relevant services get to a situation much quicker than otherwise would be the case. And we will specifically take up the point raised by Graham Pearson about how technology is used to abuse, and see what more we can do on that front, because very clearly that's a very unacceptable situation. And I think it is very important, Presiding Officer, that we do stay ahead of developments, including technological developments ourselves, both in terms of trying to prevent domestic abuse and domestic violence, but at the same time in using technology to intercept those who are trying to use text or other types of technology to spread their evil ways in terms of abuse, either of women or indeed of young girls. Can I say, going back to zero tolerance, obviously the campaign that was started 20 years ago has very much informed much of the work that both my predecessors in this job, including Malcolm Chisholm, as well as the work of the current Scottish Government in our domestic abuse and violence against women agenda and our strategy. I do think it is important to record the fact that since we have started recording the incidents of domestic abuse in Scotland, that in fact, with the exception, I think, of 1 year, it unfortunately has been a steady increase in the numbers over that period of time. And I think someone has already said that nearly 60,000 incidents were reported last year, about 47,000 of which was domestic abuse against women. I think that actually many of the reasons for that 7% increase last year and the previous increases are that fortunately more people are now prepared to come forward and to report incidents of domestic abuse. I'm not saying that entirely accounts for the increase in the numbers, because clearly it is very difficult to differentiate as to why the numbers have increased. But I do think, as a result of all the work that has been done and the campaigning that's been done by Zero Tolerance and others, that people, and particularly women of a certain age, are prepared to come forward much more than what they were maybe 20 or 30 years ago. And I think some of the cultural changes that the campaigning and the legislation has brought about means that there is no longer the level of tolerance by the abused women themselves that there was maybe 20, 30 or 40 years ago I don't think there is such a level of tolerance and acceptance of that being their lot as there was all those years ago. Unfortunately, many more are prepared to come forward. Can I also say I hear the point about funding. We've actually maintained the level of funding for the current spending period, and it's one of those budgets that was actually protected because of the importance of the funding regime to ensure that we continue to give a loud and clear message in relation to domestic abuse and violence, that we are doing what we can and funding the organisations that we can fund with the money available to deal with this situation. And can I pay tribute to the work of organisations like Rape Crisis Scotland and the tremendous work they do both nationally and in their local areas in helping women who have been the subject of either rape or attempted rape. One of the welcome developments in recent times, as announced by the Lord Advocate a few months ago, is that the number of prosecutions, successful prosecutions for rape, is actually increasing as a percentage. It's still not high enough, but it's certainly an area where we are making progress. And although the Lord Advocate isn't here this evening, I can commend the current Lord Advocate and indeed his predecessor in terms of their commitment to dealing from a Crown Office point of view with this issue very, very seriously indeed. And some success has been recorded in doing that. So I think this is one of these areas, Presiding Officer, where the Parliament is totally united. I think it's very important that we do send a very clear, loud and united voice from the Parliament every time we have one of these debates, but also on a more regular basis to demonstrate that we are committed to dealing with this issue. I look forward to the day when we actually see the numbers starting to drop and drop seriously in terms of the incidence of domestic abuse. And I think some of the initiatives taken by the police have been very important as well. I commend particularly the action taken by Strathclyde Police in and around Old Firm Games, where in the lead up to Old Firm Games, the perpetrators of domestic abuse are visited by the police both before the game and very often after the game, and they are warned about their behaviour. And similarly, over the festive period we've just had, that kind of strategy also has been adopted during that period. And we've seen during the time that initiative has been running, there's been something like a 30% decline in the incidence of domestic abuse around Old Firm Games and around festive periods. So there are areas where we're making progress. It's not fast enough, it's not enough. We need to do more, and the Scottish Government, along with everyone else in the Parliament, is totally committed to making sure that we aim to rid ourselves of this terrible blight on our society. Thank you.
Many thanks. And I now close this meeting of Parliament. Thank you.